we heard about disruption previously. We heard about companies not wanting to disrupt consumers. And here I'm going to tell you about a consumer who is disrupting an entire sector. So I'm going to tell you about luxury.
We cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. Sorry about that. So I'll start again. We've talked about disruption previously. And basically companies not wanting to disrupt consumers. And what I'm going to tell you about now is a consumer. This, we can call it le panda, I guess. So the Chinese traveler disrupting an entire sector, which is the luxury sector. So I'm going to tell you about how this has happened, and I'm going to tell you about the consequences, how the luxury companies can actually react to the change. Start with a quote from Lao Tzu. A good traveler has no fixed plans and is not intent on arriving. The Chinese traveler, the panda, is not a good traveler yet. Very much having fixed plans and very much intent on arriving in terms of social status enhancement. So I'll tell you about this consumer quickly. And I'll tell you about the consequences in terms of marketing. So the 5 P's of marketing: influence on place, price, product and promotion, and then people. So first of all, looking at this traveling panda, looking at a few characteristics. First of all, Chinese consumers are dominant for luxury. They represent about 35% of sales this year, and we believe they'll represent half, if not more, of sales by 2025. The implication of this is you have very limited growth with the Japanese, very limited growth with the Western Europeans. It's actually quite funny because 10 years ago, the Japanese probably represented 35% of the pie then. And obviously, they're a lot less relevant now. But the Chinese are not stopping. They will become more and more relevant in terms of luxury sales. This is quite exciting to see that pie grow and the proportion go to close to 50%, so people might get excited. The reality is there's not one luxury market. There's a very diverse luxury market. When I show this pyramid to brand people, they always complain that they're on the wrong level, but that's irrelevant. The reality is, depending on who you speak to, whether it's Calvin Lee at the bottom of the pyramid or Hermes up there, there's a slight relationship between names and actually what they're able to buy. Their definition of luxury will differ greatly. So Calvin Lee will tell you that Starbucks is luxury. Hermes will tell you that Harry Winston is more luxury for him. So it's a very diverse market. It's not a unified market. What is also specific to the Chinese is the age. Chinese luxury consumers are close to 15 years younger than European luxury consumers, probably more than 20 years younger than their American peers. So they're connected. They buy differently. They want different products. People have talked about the head-down tribe, and that's why backpacks work so well in Asia, because you need to have your hands free. Obviously, different ways of communicating, and a different approach, what we've called casualization. So obviously, again, a difference in the product. A difference in gender. This is what the luxury market might have looked like a few years ago, dominated by watches, dominated by men, dominated by corruption. This is what it's starting to look like now, dominated by young female consumers who are difficult to please. So clearly a massive shift from a gender perspective. And then we've talked about the French paradox. So this is the idea that the knowledge of brands has developed massively. Do you know what the French paradox is? We're in Paris. Can you tell me? Sorry? Romantic. I like that. No. It could be, but no. The French paradox is basically in wine. It's a medical survey from the 80s that was ordered in the US, and that tends to show that it's better for your health to drink 2 glasses of French red wine a day than not to. So if you don't drink, it's not great. If you drink 2 glasses of French red wine every day, it's fantastic. It has to be French. It has to be 2 glasses. It has to be every day. If you drink significantly more, obviously it goes the other way. So the reason I'm talking about the French paradox is I've tried to apply this to luxury with this idea that if your brand is completely unknown, no one's going to buy you. If you're niche alternative, people will queue up. But if you've become too well known, consumers tend to step back. And this is clearly an issue now with the Chinese traveler, with the panda, and with this idea that awareness has boomed very rapidly. So travel obviously very big domestically, but more importantly, over the past few years with the development of passport penetration, many reasons to travel abroad and to purchase luxury abroad. Partly because it's become more easy. So regulation has eased. It's a lot easier to go to Korea, to the UK, to Japan, to the US now than just 2-3 years ago. Partly because there's a validation point. You know, the selfie is probably the most relevant development for luxury. It's a validation point. If I'm buying the Burberry trench coat in London, I can brag about it. And then partly, this is a weaker point because some Chinese individuals are scared that they're not buying the real thing, and you still see a lot of these brands in China. More recently, you've had a lot of disturbance in the force, if I can say. You've had a lot of macro issues weighing tremendously. You've had equity markets hitting psychologically. We've known for a while there's a big correlation between equity markets and luxury demand in the US. We now know for a fact, since last summer basically, that there's also a big correlation between equity markets and luxury demand in China. This is the Shanghai Composite Index, and you see the collapse that started last summer. Whether wealthy Chinese individuals are invested or not is irrelevant. They're all obsessed about equity markets, even if they're not invested. You've had obviously massive shifts in terms of currency. Probably the biggest shifts over the past 20 years in a very short period of time. And then you've had also scares. So what happened in Paris, what happened in Brussels. This idea that every day you wake up and there's something new and scary going on has a big influence on this traveling panda. So what do you do with all of this? And what are the consequences for the brands? It has a consequence in terms of place. So actually, where are the purchases taking place? And what you want to do is try to anticipate where the panda is going next. And so these are the 7 top markets in terms of destinations, in terms of trips from mainland China. Hong Kong, Taiwan, Macau being under tremendous pressure. Singapore, Korea rebounding right now. And then Japan and Thailand booming from what is now becoming actually a pretty big base. So Hong Kong isn't new, but Hong Kong is actually steeply deteriorating as we speak, despite coming off of what should have been a relatively easy base. We've talked about Hong Kong being overstored, overboard. I have nothing against Rolex, but stores are looking very empty, especially on the watch front. It's become a commoditized destination. You've had, obviously, tensions, the anti-Chinese sentiment, which is something that's difficult for me to write about, because I work at HSBC, and the H is for Hong Kong. Has really ballooned. I don't know if you saw yesterday, we were talking about film. You had the local sort of Oscars given out yesterday in Hong Kong, and the top prize was given to a movie called 10 Years, which is a sort of apocalyptic vision of what Hong Kong will be in 2025 under the negative influence of China. Obviously, luxury is losing a lot, but you have alternative brands doing very well. So, for example, Apple. This is the new Adidas flagship, which is quite interesting because it replaces the former Coach flagship, which was the biggest Coach store in Asia. So Hong Kong, I think, will continue to suffer greatly. Korea is rebounding with value for money cosmetics like La Neige, which is funny if you're French. Too Cool for School in makeup. Gucci using also brand ambassadors that are well-known Korean people. And then just the administration helping out. I didn't make this up. Picked it up on Bloomberg. Tax breaks on nose jobs. Any way to bring back the panda has been used, and it's very efficient. The beginning of the year has been fantastic in Korea. Japan, a new market for Chinese. Again, Ginza, which is now the Tokyo equivalent of the Galeries Lafayette here. Locals don't shop in Ginza anymore, like locals, Parisians don't go to Galeries Lafayette anymore. It's become a Chinese neighborhood. Cosmetics as well, electronics, and obviously value for money, local brands, and again, the selfie, very important. Surprisingly, China is coming back. So actually domestic, it's a bit counterintuitive, but the only market that's doing well in luxury right now is mainland China. Despite everything you've been reading in terms of GDP, fears on renminbi, etc. China's doing well, partly because the administration is probably fed up of seeing a lot of citizens spending at Harrods or Galeries Lafayette. Partly because there is no luxury tax. Okay, this is monopoly, but they are looking to lower import taxes, to lower consumption taxes. And probably the biggest recent development, I don't know if someone here knows what this is. This is the biggest shopping mall in the world. This is on the island of Hainan. This is a domestic duty-free giant, and it's been doing so well that they're looking to replicate this. Hainan, for those of you who don't know, is technically known as the Chinese Hawaii. I've been to Hawaii, I've been to Hainan, it's a bit different. But you have all the stores you can hope for, 300 tenants, at Hong Kong price points in mainland China. So that's on place. I'll go quicker because I'm thirsty and you're thirsty. Price. The idea is you've had a lot of debates around price harmonization because basically I think there's a reality that Asian consumers have been ripped off for too long. They know what they should be paying, and you can't fool people forever. Chanel was the brand to start the price harmonization approach. To be fair, they only did it on the 3 top-selling handbags, but you've had other companies like Richemont, Burberry, trying to look at ways to mitigate, to limit the price gaps. And I think this is structural. And prior to the Chinese, the managers of luxury companies couldn't care less about price gaps. That's finished now, they've become real. Promotion, obviously increased complexity. The Chinese luxury market started really with print, and notably Vogue China in 2005. That's where you went to first. And then you went to big billboards, and you went to basically shopping window displays. And that was pretty basic. That was pretty binary. The future is a lot more complex. The future is about discovery. The future is about curation. The future is about how do I finance, how do I ship, how do I order, how do I pay. And so obviously I've just put a few icons that you probably all know about, but there are hundreds. The product has also had to evolve. Chinese don't want to buy what Chinese people buy. They want to relate to a cosmopolitan consumer. They want to think like a New Yorker, like a Parisian, like a person in Tokyo, Seoul, etc. And so the products have moved from being Chinese to gimmicky to try to basically recruit Chinese people to being Chinese relevant. So I'll give you a few examples of how things have evolved. This is what Cartier sold at some stage, and this is what they'll be taking back and destroying now because this doesn't sell anymore. And this is their latest launch, so you can see that both the product is a lot more subtle, but actually the advertising of it is a lot more subtle as well. They're actually hiding part of the thing they're trying to sell to you. So way more subtle, and it's not just because of the anti-corruption campaign, it's mostly because people travel, and they realize that if they want to relate to a cosmopolitan consumer, they need to be a bit more subtle. Sorry if you didn't hear anything I've been saying for the past 15 minutes. Product development, this is also within Richemont. I used to work at Richemont, I have nothing against Richemont. This is Vacheron Constantin celebrating Chinese New Year in a very obvious, gimmicky way, which basically doesn't really work with Chinese anymore. And I put the example of Swarovski because they have developed products specific for the Chinese, but without the gimmicky part. So products that are not sold anywhere else than in China, but they don't look Chinese. They correspond to the way Chinese people are buying. They correspond to the type of metals, to the type of price points that are sweet spots, but they are in line with the company's DNA. They're not prostituting themselves, sorry for the term, to try to just please. And then finally, people. And that was very quick, so we can have a drink. Hopefully you'll thank me. The idea is there's a new skill set needed in luxury. Okay, luxury was all about what we've called horizontal strategies. literally playing Space Invaders, looking at basically putting flags across the planet, identifying cities, identifying flagships, and shooting them down one after the other. So you had essentially business developers in this industry. You don't need business developers, you need smart people who can have tough negotiations and who can basically move from a very black and white approach to a much more colorful approach and look at what we've called vertical strategies. Vertical strategies meaning basically that you operate with a similar, stable number of units. The number of stores is the same. It's just that you invest in that store, you invest in service, you invest in digital, you invest in ways to have the consumer come back. You spend a lot more time on shopping window displays. And obviously the skill set for that is completely different. So a pretty closed industry. We were talking about openness, very closed luxury industry with a sort of copy and paste type of skill set is completely shifting. Because of, they would say, or thanks to, I would say, the relevance of the traveling panda. So that's all I have to say.